Hello everybody. I've been a little bit inactive on YouTube because, well, I've been feverishly trying to improve my game. And now that I've hit the 1600 milestone, I'd like to take the time to show you guys a game between Anand and Wely. This game features a double rook sacrifice, which is quite astounding considering the fact that Anand actually got the win. So the game starts out d4, d6, knight f3, bishop g4, c4, knight d7, and knight c3. So the game is transposed into a Wade defense characterized by the white knights on c3 and f3, pawns being placed on c4 and d4, and black has an aggressive bishop on g5, a knight on d7, and a pawn on d6. This is a pretty sound opening, but it's not quite so popular. There are a few grandmasters that have used it with some success in the past, and international masters as well. The Wade defense was actually named after an international master who used the opening for 30 years. Anyways, so bishop takes on f3, doubling up those pawns on the f-file, and g6, preparing the fianchetto, bishop e2, bishop g7, white castles, and then knight g comes to f6. So then white expands some space in the center and moves d5. So black might be looking a little cramped, so he just ignores this and castles, going for the sort of dynamic approach. f4, somewhat mysterious move. I suppose he wants to make his dark squared bishop more useful, and right now it's defending the pawn. So rook e8 on that semi-open file. He probably does plan on losing that e pawn at some point, so uncovering attacks on the white pieces with the rook. Bishop f3, knight b6, queen d3, knight f to d7, preparing a nice square over there on the queen side. b3, just solidifying that light squared diagonal, and e6 finally releasing the pressure on the e-file. And now Anand's rook is looking pretty oddly placed, but strangely enough he doesn't get it kicked because there's no pawn on the d-file, and the pawn on the e-file can't really advance without just being captured and strengthening black's center. Let's see what would happen if white moved the pawn. So this white's finally lost the advantage. So all game white's had a slight advantage, and so that move is apparently bad because I believe it gives black a little bit too much space, and white's forced to play quite passively as black pushes up the board. So that's one of the proposed engine lines. So let's go back to the main line, shall we? So then in the game, white plays bishop to b2, which is a nice diagonal for it. And black starts to advance his pawns, and so with queen f8, Anand plans to double his rooks up on the e-file, bearing down on the queen can perhaps step into e7 and assist in the attack. So the move was a long-term goal sort of idea. Now white starts advancing a kingside pawn storm with b3, and the problem with that, g3, I'm sorry, and the problem with that is it reduces his king's safety, and I'm not sure what the plan is besides just pushing the pawns. I'm not sure exactly how he plans on, gaining the initiative with black's pretty secure position. but we'll see what happens here. So rook doubles up, and now the pawn storm continues, or begins, should I say. And now white still has the advantage, surprisingly enough. Not as much of an advantage as earlier. It's only 1/10 of a pawn. And, I mean, in human chess, I mean, that much of an advantage really isn't an advantage. So, essentially it's even, and white can potentially, you know, hold on despite his reduced king safety. His rooks are on the back rank, and his bishop over on f3 is actually quite useful. So the light squares are safe, the dark squares are safe. White's queen is well placed. However, the position starts to become disastrous in a couple moves. So Anand prophylactically advances his f-pawn, kind of threatening to fizzle white's attack, and disaster begins for the white position with h5. Whatever advantage white had is gone, and black has a slight advantage at this point. So decides to push his g-pawn, and white just continues with his aggressive kingside pawn storm. Now Anand decides to capture with his f-pawn, and believe it or not, that wasn't the best move. Recommended would be g takes f4, and then white's best reply would be queen takes on f5, offering the trade and threatening to bring his pawns in further. But after queen e7, white's actually in sort of a mini zugzwang. The advantage tips more heavily in the favor of black, and there's not a whole lot white can do here, because I mean, every move seems to deteriorate his position, and bishop a1 is actually really the only suggestion here. And then black can just move in with an attack, and a computer line calculated by Houdini looks something like this, with the advantage growing for black with every move, basically. So, anyways, you all can see where this is headed here. Just an aggressive game for black. There's no guarantee that's the line that either player would have followed, but it gives you an idea of what, you know, could happen. So f takes g4, which is what Anand played, giving the advantage back to white temporarily, because bishop recaptures with an attack on the rook. And this is where the game becomes interesting. Anand finds queen takes on f4. This is astounding, because he's given up the rook, the exchange sack, with check. And so after the rook he recaptures, suddenly the position is even. Stripping away the king's safety turns out to be enough compensation for the sacrifice, and white goes for the queen's trade. Now this game gets even stranger when black just gives up his queen. Usually when you have some sort of a material disadvantage, you don't want to lose your strong pieces, especially the queen. So the advantage is, believe it or not, almost a pawn in favor of white after rook to e3. Almost a full pawn. But Anand is an extremely intelligent player, and he's calculated most of these lines. And Wely is a very strong player, you know, over 2,700, but he doesn't find any sort of way to use his advantage to his favor. So king to c2, I'm sorry, king to f2, and then rook takes on c3. An astounding move once again, throwing away another rook. So after the recaptures, he does restore 1 point of his material imbalance by giving up a rook for 2 minor pieces, but he's still behind and he doesn't have any rooks. So in a position like this, white would be assumed to have the advantage by a long shot, but believe it or not, Houdini gives this as 6/10 of a pawn in favor of, well, let's say 2/3 of a pawn, in favor of white. So this is actually somewhat even. Anand continues with his plan. His goals will be to defend his minor pieces with each other and to advance his pawn chain on the king's side, hoping to use his pawn majority to his advantage. And he does have one more pawn than white, so white's goals are going to be to try to pick on the weak pawns and prevent black from really making any progress with his rooks. White's king is actually more towards the center, and towards the endgame this is a good thing, but in a 3 minor piece versus 2 rook, it's sort of unique endgame. The theory relatively unexplored. So let's go on. The rook does take a pawn now, completely restoring the balance. However, Anand finds bishop attacks rook. Rook avoids the attack, and the king begins to move in now. White's advantage is diminishing. So after the rook goes over to h6, attacking the undefended pawn, Anand defends with the king. Rook moves back, possibly playing for a draw, because look at this, we had a repeated sort of position. So Anand keeps up the pressure, advancing his knight, and white offers the pawn, but black doesn't oblige and just simply defends his knight. Now white defends his pawn. Black's moving the king towards the center, and rook retreat. Bishop moves in to defend the knight, allowing the knight to move forward with check. Recommended would be something like king g2, which increases his king's safety and opens up the f-file. What happened in the game wasn't quite so beneficial. He actually moved his king to e3, so he went here from this position to e3, and this actually reduces the king's safety, and centralizing the king is important in the endgame, but this isn't much of an endgame. It's 3 minor pieces versus 2 rooks. So after knight e5, black is now with a slight advantage, but growing. An aggressive rook move, rook f5, h6, defending the... Alright, so once again, white makes a weak move, giving black almost a full pawn's advantage. Recommended would have been, once again, a passive king move like king f2, which, you know, retains his slight disadvantage as opposed to a bigger disadvantage. But after a3, black moves king e6, finding the best move. Let's say white made another passive move. Black would be able to take the pawn with check. After the king moves, whoops, then black would capture the rook. So he has to sacrifice the rook, and now black has a clear advantage all of a sudden. So the game plays out a little bit further with some pretty natural moves, and white resigns because he won't be able to stop this a pawn from promoting without losing his rook. So thank you for watching, everybody, and stay tuned because I'm currently working on a chess video describing the nature of and the history of and the function of chess engines. Thank you.